Trapped in Death Cave by Bill Wallace. Chapter 4. Halfway up the side of Rattlesnake Hill, the road came to a dead end. A small winding path led from there to the top of the hill. Gary stopped. His feet didn't move as he stood frozen, staring at something up ahead. "There," Gary's voice was a whisper, tight, nervous. "That's it. That's the Becker's place." Brian felt a lump in his throat. He could see a house through some trees ahead. It seemed out of place, lonely, like something that was once real nice but had long been forgotten and left to age and decay. It was deserted, scary. Instead of the house being made of cobblestone, like the rest of the houses in Medicine Park, it was all wood, brown and cracked looking. There were gobs of trees and bushes crowded up against it, smothering it with green tangled vines. Ivy and spring creeper had crawled up the side of the house and was wrapped themselves in a solid mat, gnarled and tangled around the rock chimney. The way the door and the two upstairs windows set, it made the front of the house look like a face. The two windows were eyes, the door a puckered-up mouth. The old house would have been scary enough at high noon, but to Brian, standing in half shadows of the Oklahoma sunset, it was like seeing a haunted castle straight out of a picture show. Gary motioned Brian to follow him as he moved up the hill. It was starting to get dark. The dim, shifting shadows made it hard to see. The closer they got to the Becker's house, the more Brian wanted to turn around and go back home. He tugged at Gary's sleeve. "Let's wait till tomorrow," he whispered. "No, that way it'll be light enough to see good," he argued. "When it's good and light." "No," Gary cut him off. "But we could come back early and—" "No." "But Gary—" "Come on, it won't take long, Brian." Brian held his arm, making him stop. Gary turned with an irritated frown. "What's wrong? You scared?" Brian glared back at him. "No, I ain't scared," he lied. "It's only, well—" "Look," Gary snapped, "if you're scared to go with me, stay here or go on home if you want. But me, I'm going up and have me a look-see. I'm going to talk to that Mrs. Becker." Gary yanked his arm away and marched on toward the spooky-looking house. Brian hesitated, but only for a second. He was soon following right behind his friend, moving on quiet feet, holding his breath. The trees grew thicker as they neared the old house. When they moved through them, the darkness seemed to close in, and it was quiet. So quiet that Brian could almost hear his heart thumping in his ears. Around this time of the evening, the wind usually settled. Without the push of the wind, the leaves didn't rattle on the trees, and the limbs didn't shake and squeak. It was usually quiet this time of day, only Brian couldn't ever remember it being this quiet. He reached up and tugged at Gary's arm again. Gary jumped and wheeled around. "Don't do that," he whispered. "It's spooky enough around here without you grabbing me." Brian motioned with his head for Gary to lean close to him. "I got a bad feeling," Brian confessed. "I got a bad feeling about this place." "It's just your imagination." Gary looked around nervous-like. It'll only take us a minute. We'll look in the barn and then the shed and then get out of here." Brian bit at his bottom lip. I figured we're gonna get in trouble. We're already late for supper. And if this old lady's really crazy, like everybody says, hard telling what she's liable to do. Come on, let's go home." Gary swayed back and forth from one foot to the other like he was having trouble making up his mind. Finally, he shook his head. "No, we're already here. We won't ask her about the maps. I just want to look at her, see if she really is crazy. She won't even know we've been around." Gary led the way toward the rickety old wood shed. They stayed at the edge of the trees, using the long shadows and the brush as cover so they couldn't be seen. The house seemed empty. There were no lights, no sounds coming from the open front door. Through the vines and the stuff, the boys could see some of the windows. They stopped to look inside just to make sure there was no one stirring there, then moved on again. The old shed and a barn were about 50 yards from the house. When they came up from the tree, the shed was closer. When they got to the edge of it, Gary suddenly jerked and stopped dead in his tracks. "What is it?" Brian urged. Gary shushed him. "Listen." There was a sound, an unfamiliar, far-off sound. Brian frowned, tilting his head to the side, trying to hear what it was. Although he couldn't hear it well, the sound reminded him of some kind of machine, a grinding, buzzing sound, sort of like an electric sander Dad had in his workroom back home. Only it was different. It was slower than a machine, much slower. "What is it?" Brian whispered. Gary shrugged. "Don't know. Sounds like it's coming from the barn." "Let's get out of here," Brian urged. Gary shook his head. "No, listen." The sound had stopped. Brian sighed. He didn't know what had been making that strange sound, but he was glad it stopped. Gary motioned him to follow. They moved around the edge of the rickety woodshed to where the door was. Brian saw Gary's hand shake as it reached out for the door handle. The rusty old hinges squeaked as the door swung open. Brian leaned around. He squinted, trying to see into the darkness of the shed. He couldn't see anything, not at first, but after a few seconds of staring into the darkness, his eyes got used to it. In the back of the shed were some wood risers and some boxes with straw in them. Judging from the smell of the place, it had to have been a chicken coop at one time, but there was other stuff there too. Old tools and boxes filled with scraps of junk. Hanging from the walls, Brian could make out leather harnesses, the kind they used to plow horses in the old days. There was a saddle covered with dust, some ropes that looked dry enough to crack into if anybody were to try and use them, ropes that were too big for lassos, ropes that hung from the rafters with cobwebs woven in between them, making them look like drapes or curtains. There were gobs and gobs of stuff in the little shed, so much stuff that it would be hard for anyone to get inside that place, much less walk around. Brian felt his shoulders slump and sighed, relieved that they hadn't found old Lady Becker. The door squeaked again when Gary closed it, but along with the squeaking sound of the door, there was another sound. "What are you boys doing in my shed?" The angry, high-pitched voice screeched close to beside them. Brian jumped so hard his stomach bounced clear up to his throat. He almost fell when he wheeled around to see who was there. Only a few feet away, a form that took shape in the doorway of the big barn. It came from the shadows inside, came from the darkness into the dim light that seemed to move and change shapes with the flickering movement of the tree limbs. Brian froze. He could feel the tingle run up and down his back, feel the hair stand up straight on the back of his neck. It was a witch! "What are you boys doing in my shed?" this crackly voice demanded again. Brian could see her plainly now. He took a step back and froze, trembling. She was small and withered with age. Her long black dress made her hard to see when she came from the darkness. Her face was wrinkled and drawn. Her eyes were dark black, like the night. Long white hair spun and twisted its way clear down past her shoulders. Wild-looking hair that stood out in all directions. And in her hands, in her wrinkly, twisty hands, she carried an axe. The sun had gone behind the mountains, but a round full moon had come up to replace a little of its light. The white light of the moon caught the blade light reflected from an axe so brightly that it was almost like a mirror. Brian's throat was tight. He couldn't swallow. Gary held the door of the shed like he was stuck. "You boys get away from there," her gravel-like voice roared sharp. "Get, 'fore I skin you alive." She came towards them. The light glistened from the sharp blade of the axe as she came nearer. Dun, dun.